Hey guys, how are you doing? In this video, I'm going to show you the step-by-step of chart interpretation. And to do that, I'm going to use a drill in my own answer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the steps you should follow, give you an overview of those, and then move on to the case question, give you an opportunity to try that, and then I'm going to give you my answer, and then I'm going to go through a detailed breakdown of my answer of each step, of each of the principles in the steps, and show you what I did, why I did exactly what I did. Okay? So the first thing you need to know is why these steps exist. And they exist because they're used on the job on a day-to-day basis. I'm going to show you how they're used on the job throughout this video. If you can read charts like a good consultant rather than a good candidate, your performance is going to be bulletproof. That's why I want you to understand how this is used. So the first step is understand the exhibits. I know it sounds silly, but really it's not. If you ask anyone who's been given charts in case interviews, especially in NBB, they're gonna tell you there are confusing metrics, there are charts you've never seen, there are tables full of scary numbers, and there are footnotes that change everything. Not all of those in the same chart usually, but they'll appear at some point. I don't mean to scare you, but you need to know that those things are going to be there because they put them there on purpose. You're being tested through that. They're testing to see if you understand what you're seeing before you start to do anything. That's what they're testing in this step. And why are they testing that? Because it's an ability consultants use every day. So every time you get put in a new project, it's likely in a new industry that you've never seen. And every industry has their own metrics. And all those metrics have their own different behaviors. If you get put in a new project in a different industry that you've never seen, you're probably going to have to understand 5 to 10 different metrics that you didn't know before. And you're going to have to understand them before you start doing your analysis, coming up with your recommendations, or talking to anyone important. And the second step is to generate insights. That means to filter the information from the exhibit. Get your attention caught to what matters and state it. So someone made that slide to prove or disprove a point. What's that point? What is it? What's that slide trying to tell you about this case? How does it affect your hypothesis? How does it help answer the client's problem, the case question? And next, number 3, synthesize, and lead from your insights. So first, you gotta synthesize. That means finding the key message from the slide and then lead from it. So coming up with the next steps. What should your team do next? What should your client do next? What should be done based on that information? Do you ever hear about how a consultant always knows what to do? People say it all the time. It's because they're always looking for it. There's a leading attitude, looking for next steps when they see new data. So new data comes in, they turn it into information and come up with what to do based on that. And that turns them into natural thought leaders. And that's why this ability is essential, and it's possible to train because you need to keep looking at new data, finding information in it, and then turning that into action that's going to solve the problem that you're dealing with at the moment. Now, let's move on to the case question. So, if you look at it, you're going to see that it's a regular profitability case question. There is no charts in it yet. That's because the chart interpretation question is gonna follow up to it. That's usually how it goes. You'll have a framework question or a brainstorming question or something, and then after that you're gonna get a couple of charts or one chart or a couple of exhibits, and your answer to the first question is probably gonna help you, not necessarily, but probably gonna help you understand where those charts stand in the case. Okay, so the case question here is, Achilles Shoes is a large shoe store in Sydney, Australia. Over the last year, Achilles Shoes has faced a steep decrease in profitability, from 10 to minus 5% of revenues, so from a profit to losses, despite significant revenue increase. They've hired you to help them figure out what's going on and restore profitability without harming sales. So how can Achilles Shoes restore their profitability? That's the case question. And try coming up with your answer to this question. I'm not going to give you my answer here because that's not the focus and we can work without it. But having your own answer is going to help you answer to the chart question afterwards. So I'm gonna move on to the chart now. After you're done, now pause the video, and after you're done, hit play. Look at the charts and try coming up with your answer to this. The question is, what do you think? So if you're ready to hear my answer, let's go. The first thing I'd like to know here is, I'm not familiar with this COGS term, COGS. What does it mean? An interviewer will tell me, well, that means cost of goods sold is what you pay for whatever you're selling. Okay? And just to be sure, AUD are Australian dollars? Yes, they are. Okay. All right. So the first thing that catches my attention here is we have, actually, we do see this decrease in profitability from what is just above 10% of our revenues, looks a little bit like 15% of our revenues, to 120, which seems to be, yes, around minus 5% of our revenues. So profits have decreased by 150% last year, and revenues have increased by well above 10% in the last year. So let's take a look at those cost components to understand what caused that. If we look at gross profits to account for cost of goods sold, we can see that gross profits used to be around 45% of revenues, and then while revenues increased by around 15% from 16 to 17, gross profits have decreased from 990 to 920. So while they should have increased in around 150, they decreased by around 70. So that's around a $220,000 gap. And next cost component, we have sales costs. And sales costs were steady at around 10% of revenues. And suddenly they're 20% of revenues between 16 and 17. So they account for other $255,000 in the profit gap. If we add up the profit from 16 and the losses from 17, the gap is only 370, but the profits should have actually have increased with the increase in revenues. So margin, and not only that, but margin should have increased too. So the $475 gap that we're seeing that's covered by COGS and sales costs is explained by that. So what I can see here is profits should be around 280,000, and cost of goods sold and sales costs are responsible for the gap between that and $120,000 in losses. And we should probably investigate, number one, negotiation issues with suppliers, and number two, product mix changes, and maybe even pricing, to understand what could have happened to our cost of goods sold that increased as a percentage of revenues. And then we should understand commission policy changes from 16 to 17, and potential discounts that might have been put in place that could be coming up as sales costs. And those could explain the increase in sales costs, the sharp increase that responds for $255,000 in our profit decrease. Okay? So the interviewer is going to say, okay, well, this is all very interesting. It's interesting that you mentioned that, because we actually have this chart here for you. Now, take a look at this chart, take your time, draw your answer, come up with it, say it out loud, and then listen to mine. So in this exhibit, we can see a clear change in product mix. What used to be over 50% of our sales in units that was product line A is now what looks like around 10%, and product line C, which was around 20% of our sales in units, represents now more than 50% of them. So I would guess that they have that product C has a lower margin, and let's take a look at that. So it seems like the gross margin for product A is under 50%, looks like 45%. For product B, that's clearly 50%, and for product C, that's 75%. So what happens is we are now selling much more of a cheaper and with a much lower gross margin product. So the product mix change looks like it's indeed responsible for the change in gross margin. Of course, I would need to do the math to confirm that and multiply those costs of goods sold by the units and see if we did have a change in price along with the change in mix, the price we pay for the products, okay? And before finding a solution, the next step would be to find out what caused this sudden product mix change, because this could be anywhere from a supply to a demand problem. So if it were a supply problem, I would guess something like maybe we are not having product line A in stock, so we're out of stock and people can't buy it, so they end up buying product line C. Maybe salespeople are pushing it because of higher commissions, which would link to the sales cost problems that we have. Or maybe the point of sale trade marketing for product C is very good suddenly. Okay? And if it were a demand problem, we could have seen change in customers' preferences. We could have seen changes in available income from customers, so now they're buying a cheaper product. And it could be that the clients that come to us have changed. Maybe the region where our store is located or the public that goes to that specific region have changed to a public that would rather buy product C than product A, either for their characteristics or for their price. Okay? Now let's move on to the answer breakdown, which should be the most important part of this video. I'm gonna go through each of these steps and I'm gonna go principle by principle, showing what my answer had and what your answer should have. Take a look at those and compare that with your answer and see if you had the same, or if you didn't have the same, why not, and try changing and having it the next time. If you want to redo this case in order to contemplate everything that you should have, then feel free to do it. Okay? So first, understand the exhibit. One thing, you need to understand the terms and the units used. So here's an example. What I did right in the beginning of the first exhibit I got was ask the interviewer what does COGS mean and if AUD are really Australian dollars. Of course I know that because I built this case, I drew the slides, but it could have been the case that I did not know it, and although COGS is a fairly standard concept, I might not know it, and it's okay to ask, and that's what I wanted to show you, and I wanted to show you how I would ask it. If you don't do this and you make a mistake in the case because you didn't understand one of the terms and you started doing some stuff with it, you're proving to the interviewer that you will make that kind of mistake with a client. You're proving to them that you might embarrass your manager in a meeting with the partner, or even worse with the client, and you're proving that you might even waste time working on something that you got a wrongful understanding of before starting to plan and to work. Okay? So next, understand the chart and the relationships in it. So it goes for the same reasons as the point above, but it's slightly different because it's understanding the chart. So get the example of this chart. It's a cost breakdown in 100% bars, stacked bars. If you're not sure that these are 100% stacked bars and that each of those cost components are in percentage of total costs, if you think that this chart could be in percentage of revenues, or maybe total costs did not change in those 3 years, you need to ask and you need to understand. Next, you always have to read the footnotes. They might be important. They're there for a reason and they might change your conclusion, and it won't even take you a minute. So always read the footnotes too. This is where they're always going to be, right under the end of the exhibit. Okay? Next, clarify when necessary. So remember how consultants need to understand 5 to 10 metrics every time they're put in a new project in a new industry. How do you think they do to understand those metrics, to learn those metrics? They ask. Whenever a consultant looks at a chart for their first time, they're expected to ask their questions because they need to understand what's going on. They're not expected to understand everything beforehand, nor are you. In a case interview, it's not only okay for you to ask questions, it's expected that you'll ask questions. The interviewers will put weird stuff in the exhibits to test you. Many candidates don't ask questions because they want to look smart, they want to look confident, and that's not going to help you. That's not what you're being tested for. You're being tested for asking the right questions and understanding the terms and understanding what you're doing before doing anything. The next step is to generate insights. So, of course, good insights are accurate and relevant to the case. But what does an insight mean? What does being relevant to the case mean? So, an insight is the one relevant message that the data tells you. And what does it mean to be relevant? So, the client has one large important question, the case question. That's the client's main problem. In this case, how can they increase profits? And a relevant insight is something that data tells you that helps answer part of that question, or helps say which answer is most likely for a part of that question, or which answers are not likely for that part of the question or for the full question. So let's take a look at my answer. I said profits have decreased by 150% last year, while revenues have increased by well above 10%. Those are not really relevant insights. They were just introduction for the rest of my answer where the actual insight would be. And here they are. So I said COGS increase seemed to be responsible for $220,000 of the profit decrease. And so this helps my client gets one step closer to knowing why their profits have decreased. Of course, next we would need to understand what caused the increase in cost of goods sold. And then I said, and sales costs are responsible for more $255,000 of the profit decrease. And this also helps my client get one step closer to knowing what happened. So there's one or two different, or maybe more, of course, phenomenon that caused the increase in these two cost components, which then made my profits decrease. And so now, after my insight, we're closer to the answer. We're two steps closer to the answer. And there's an indication that the answer might be in here. Okay, this is what relevant insight means. Now, great insights are almost always quantified. What does that mean? What does it mean to quantify an insight? It means you don't say something is larger, you say something is X% larger. You don't say something needs to decrease, you say something needs to decrease by Y million dollars. Let me give you some examples of quantifications in my answer. So here in the first one, I said in this first chart, I didn't say product line A responded for a lot of our units sold. I said it used to respond for around 50% in 2014. And I didn't say product line didn't sell much, product line C didn't sell much. I said product line C represented around 20% of my units sold. And then in the last year I said product line A now represents around 10%. I didn't say it decreased a lot, I said it now represents 10%. And product line C now represents well above 50%. It's not the majority, it's not a lot of it, it's as precise as I can get, it's well above 50%. Another example where I did this is I said the margins of these products. I didn't say product line A has a much larger margin than product line C. I said product line A has 45% margin, product line B has 50% margin, product line C has 75% margin. This means product line C has a margin that's much lower than product line A. Okay, I inverted here. I'm saying margin, but I was also trying to say cost of goods sold as percentage of price. Okay? More examples of this are here in my first answer for the first chart. So I said profits have decreased by 150%. I said, while revenues have increased by well above 10%. I said, cost of goods sold increase seems to be responsible for $220,000. I said, sales costs for other $255,000. Then in my synthesis, I said, profits should be around $280,000. So I keep turning stuff into numbers, into values, so that they can all make sense together rather than more and more and more and less and less and less, and you don't know if things really add up or not. So something else that I want you to learn here is quantification does not mean doing math mindlessly. Doing math is not a goal, it's a tool. If you need your picture on the wall, for example, you're not going to go around hitting your hammer everywhere. You're going to hit it 3 or 4 times in one correct spot, and you're going to put a nail in there, and then you're going to put your picture on top. In fact, if you can, you won't even use your hammer at all. If there's already a nail there, you're just going to put your picture up. And many candidates see a chart and they start dividing numbers, multiplying numbers, all kinds of nonsense. Like in this first chart, I could have gotten the chart and started calculating the compound average growth rate for revenues, for net profits, for operating profits. I could have looked at the income tax and tried to find some kind of pattern or some kind of problem. But really, that's wrong. That's just doing math as if that's the goal. As if, oh, okay, I got a chart, so now I've done my math, so I've passed. That's not how it works. You got to take the right conclusions out of it. If you need to use math, then you will do it. If you don't need to, then you won't. Of course, if you have insights that you can quantify, that's better, but the insights come first, then the quantification of those insights. You don't go around doing math mindlessly. Okay? Now, I also want you to understand the 2 most common mistakes that people make while supposedly quantificating. The first one is coming up with irrelevant numbers. So like I said, calculating the compound average growth rate of revenues and then of cost of goods sold or something that don't actually mean anything or anything like that. And number 2, it's actually coming up with relevant numbers but no comparison to them, and then saying conclusions from them that don't make sense. So they get a 10% cost reduction and say that's good. You can't say that's good if you don't know how that's going to affect profits, if you don't know the weight of that component in the P&L statement. And sometimes they'll say, well, there's a 10% profit increase. That's good. You don't know that unless you know what the investment for that is. Maybe that's a terrible investment. That has terrible return on investment. Maybe they'll find out that they need to hire 10 employees for their sales team and say that sounds reasonable. What if they have only 1 employee in their current sales team or something like that? So the numbers by themselves don't mean anything. You need comparison for them. In this case, we're already talking profits, and most of these numbers are already well compared. But it's one of the most common mistakes in quantification is coming up with numbers and not knowing what to do with them and not knowing how to relate them to the case. Okay? Now, the third step is to synthesize and lead from your insights. What does this mean? Your insights, there are several insights in one exhibit. They're not necessarily related, but they're all observations that are relevant to the case question. Your synthesis is the one message in this slide. It could combine the insights, or it could be just the one most relevant. It could bring in knowledge from outside of the exhibit if needed, but it is the one message that that slide or that exhibit should convey. And it should have a leading attitude to it. It should guide you towards the answer to your case. So that's why it's the so what. It's so what? What does that information matter? It matters because this is what it means to the case question and to our hypothesis, and this is what it means to you. This is what you should do based on it. That's why it leads towards the next steps, which will lead the client toward their goal and the teams toward their next step in the project. So what you're showing, what you're proving here is that you as a consultant, use your data to lead your team and your client towards their objectives. You're showing that if you see new data, your bias of thought is, what does everyone do tomorrow based on this? Okay, and that's where leadership comes from. Leadership doesn't come only from interpersonal abilities, but also from knowing what to do to reach a goal. So someone that's a lead, someone that doesn't have this might be empathic, but they're just going to be an empathic person. They're not going to be a leader. You need to be able to turn your data into conclusions, your conclusions to guidelines and next steps to reach an objective. And that's how you're going to guide everyone towards their objective. Lead your team towards the objective. And this requires some effort. It's not as simple as looking at the number and saying some specific sentence. It requires thought. Let me show you some examples to show you this. So in this first case, I said we should investigate negotiation issues, product mix changes, and I ended up mentioning price too, because that could be an issue. And after I did that, I didn't only say we should investigate what drives costs up. That would be okay, but after I mentioned what could be happening and what we should investigate, now my team knows what they should do, and my project will go smoothly. We have guidance for at least the next 2 weeks on what to work on, and we know that we're going to be closer to solving the problem afterwards. Now take a look at Exhibit 2. I said product mix change is indeed responsible for change in gross margin. We need to check if there is a cost effect here too, that I'm paying more for the products. Maybe I am, but I've also said what could be causing this problem. I said there could be the change in mix. It could be supply problems. It could be demand issues, and we need to investigate that. So again, we have the same guidance. Now my team knows what to do, and this makes me a leader in this project. People will look for me to know what to do. Okay? Well, this is it for this case. I hope this helped you, and I'll see you in the next video.